The snow wasn't red when he crawled across it, but it was by the time Clara Whitlock found him half frozen, half dead, and wrapped in silence. The wind tore through the plains like a ghostly war cry, rattling the timbers of the Whitlock barn and setting the horses to snorting nervously. 10-year-old Clara had slipped out early, same as always, boots crunching over frost, her small hands clutching a bucket of oats. Her breath came in quick clouds as she whispered to the mares. That's when she heard it, a noise that didn't. A grunt, wet, ragged, close. She froze. Oats spilling, behind the stacked hay bales, just near the feed trough, a dark shape moved. Not an animal. A man, barely. His face was streaked with dried blood and mud, lips cracked, eyes dim, skin the color of old bronze. 2 arrows broken off in his side, a third still buried. One hand clutched his stomach, the other scraped weakly at the frozen floor. Clara dropped the bucket. The man looked up. Didn't speak. Just stared at her with the quiet of someone ready to die. Any grown-up would have screamed. Run for the shotgun. Called the sheriff. But Clara did none of that. She stepped forward. Her small fingers unclipped the blanket from her shoulders, her mama's old quilt with faded blue stitching, and she bent low, wrapping it around his broken body like she was tucking in a doll for bed. His hand twitched. Not to stop her. Maybe in thanks. He passed out soon after. Clara dragged 2 feed sacks together and rolled him onto them, covering him with hay, blanket, and her own winter coat. Then she ran back to the house, heart pounding, cheeks burning, not with fear, but purpose. Her father, Elijah Whitlock, didn't notice the missing coat. He sat at the table carving bullets from lead, eyes narrow behind his whiskey glass. A Civil War man, scarred by battles both blue and gray. He'd homesteaded this land 12 years ago, built it up with blood and sweat and the occasional fistfight. Finish your breakfast, girl, he muttered. Snow's comin' heavy. Clara ate quickly, mouth tight, her mind spinning. She didn't know much about the Lakota, except what her father said, that they were fast on horses, fierce with blades, and full of hate. But the man in the barn hadn't looked full of hate. Just pain. That night, after the house settled into creaks and silence, she crept back out with biscuits and a jar of water. He was awake this time, eyes alert, watching. You ain't gonna kill me, are you? She whispered. The warrior said nothing. But when she handed him the biscuit, his shaking fingers accepted it. He chewed slowly, as if every bite was foreign. Clara sat nearby, hugging her knees, speaking to the dark. They'd hang Papa if they knew you was here. Probably me too. Still silence. I won't tell, she added. Promise? Bye. The third day, the snow had thickened to a white hush, blanketing the prairie, masking the trail of blood he'd left behind. His wounds wept less. He drank water. Even sat up for a while. Clara brought more food, wiped his forehead, spoke stories of her ma who died in the last pox, of her schoolteacher who smelled like onions, of the time a hawk stole a chicken right. Off the porch, he never told her his name, but he listened. And when he took her hand in his cracked, rough palm and held it for a heartbeat, she knew he wouldn't forget. Then came the 4th morning. And with it, the mistake. Old man Craddock spotted her slipping from the barn with an empty bowl. He squinted, leaned on his cane and sniffed trouble like a bloodhound. By noon, word had spread. A redskin had been found near the Whitlock barn, Craddock told the sheriff, and the sheriff told the saloon. By sundown, men were loading rifles and whispering about raiding parties. Clara's father kicked open the barn doors with a shotgun in hand, but found no one. Just bloodstains, broken arrows, and the empty blanket. Only one thing remained that hadn't been there before. A feather, long, black, bound in red thread. By the time Sheriff Alden rode out to the Whitlock place, the sun was bleeding out behind the hills and the sky had turned, the color of old bruises. He came with 5 men on horseback, 2 ranch hands, a deputy, and the preacher from town, all armed and sour-eyed. They weren't coming for tea. Asterisk Elijah Whitlock met them at the fence line, shotgun slung loose, but visible asterisk ain't no warrior here, he grunted, voice flat. Barn's clean. Asterisk, not what Craddock says, the sheriff replied, his voice tight under the brim of his hat. Old man swears your girl's been feeding the wounded savage for days. Says she gave up her own coat to keep him alive. Asterisk Clara stood just inside the barn's shadow, heart racing, fingers curled around a wooden beam. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she heard every word. Elijah's jaw worked a moment before he spat into the snow. My girl ain't no liar. Nor is she fool enough to break bread with a Lakota. Asterisk, you sure about that? The preacher asked, shifting in his saddle. Mercy's a fine thing in the Bible, but harboring an Indian's a hanging offense in some places. Asterisk, that so? Elijah stepped forward. You aim to hang a 10-year-old? The sheriff raised a hand before things turned ugly. No one's hanging nobody. We're just saying, if he was here, and if he's gone now, he ain't gone far. If he's rallying others, he glanced at the tree line, voice lowering, we got a war on our hands. Asterisk behind him, one of the ranchers muttered, first the raids last summer. Now this, asterisk another said, should have finished them off at Wounded Knee when we had the chance. Asterisk the wind picked up, carrying a warning with it. A deep cold, the kind that told men to stack their firewood high and keep a rifle close. The sheriff looked Elijah over once more and nodded grimly. Asterisk, we'll ride the hills at first light. If he's out there, we'll find him. Inside, the fire crackled low as Elijah stared at the feather Clara had left on the table. Asterisk, you tell me now, he said without looking at her. Was he here? Clara's small hands trembled at her sides. I didn't mean to lie, Papa. He was hurt. Real bad, bleeding through the snow like he'd been hunted. I couldn't leave him. Asterisk her father rubbed his temples, the weight of too many. Ghosts pressing down. You don't know what these men done. What they will do, asterisk. He didn't hurt me. Asterisk, that ain't the point, girl. Asterisk he stood, walked to the window, and stared out across the plains as the wind howled like a wolf losing its mate. Asterisk, I fought at Gettysburg, he said quietly. Watched boys younger than me cough up pieces of their lungs in the dirt. But I'd seen the worst men could do, but when we came west, I saw worse, women cut open, babies taken. Fires where homes used to be. You think kindness means anything to a man taught to hate? Clara stepped forward, tears hot on her cheeks. He wasn't full of hate, Papa. He was full of holes. Asterisk he turned then slowly, not angry, just tired. His eyes scanned her face as if seeing her for the first time, and something in his expression cracked. Not wide, just enough, asterisk. Go to bed, he whispered, and pray that man's long gone. That night, as darkness swallowed the prairie whole, Clara lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the shutters. The barn felt so far away now, empty and cold, asterisk, but just before sleep took her, she thought she heard something else, asterisk, not the wind. Not the horses, hoofbeats, faint, rhythmic, growing, and in her mind's eye, she saw them coming shadows on horseback, riding the ridgelines, silent as vengeance, asterisk. The sky broke open at dawn, spilling fire and frost across the plains. The snow had crusted overnight, and the wind moved low like it was hiding something. Asterisk Elijah was already on the porch with a rifle across his lap, pipe clenched in his teeth, boots frozen to the boards. He hadn't slept. Neither had the sheriff's men, camped near the ridge, watching, waiting. The silence between them all was thick enough to choke a mule god asterisk then. Just past first light, they came asterisk. At first it was a line on the horizon, a black stitch where the white snow met the edge of the pine wood. Then the line moved, split, multiplied. Hooves struck the frozen earth like a war drum, thundering in rhythm. Out from the trees rode warriors, dozens, no, hundreds, 200 Lakota, painted, ponies, war feathers, bone necklaces glinting in the light. Not charging, marching, silent as death. The townsfolk gathered like a frightened herd. Behind wagons, behind fences, behind one another, shotguns were cocked, mothers pulled children close. The preacher began muttering scripture like it could stop arrows. Elijah stood his ground at the barn. Clara was beside him now, though he hadn't meant for her to be. She stared wide-eyed at the wave of horsemen gliding across the snow, their breath fogging the air like spirits. A single rider broke off from the formation, slowly, deliberately. He rode a pale buckskin with black markings like handprints on its flanks. A red sash crossed his chest, and wrapped around his shoulders was Clara's blanket, her mama's quilt, now patched with rawhide and bloodstains. Clara gasped. "It's him!" Elijah's eyes narrowed. The rifle twitched in his grip. But the man didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he rode until he was 20 paces from the barn, then dismounted. No war cry. No raised spear. Just silence, thick and reverent. The warrior looked around at the gathered townsfolk, then at Elijah, and finally at Clara. His gaze softened just a little. Then he knelt, right there in the snow. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a carved stick wrapped in dyed quills, a talking stick, sacred among his people. He spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Each syllable measured like music in a funeral procession. This child gave warmth to a man the cold had claimed. She knew not my name nor my tribe, only that I bled and I breathed. The preacher raised a hand. You bring an army too. Thank a girl? The warrior ignored him. She did not see the color of war paint. She saw a man dying, and she gave him life. Whispers moved like fire through the crowd. Elijah stared hard. You didn't come for revenge? The man looked at him, eyes dark as night, voice steady. No, we came because in our way, when a man is shown mercy, he is bound to return it. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, then he turned to Clara. From his belt he removed something long and black, a feather, bound in red thread, just like the one he'd left behind. He pressed it into her palm. Midikuasik, he whispered. We are all related. And then, without further word, he returned to his horse. He mounted, raised a fist, and with that signal, 200 warriors turned as one, a wall of silence and discipline, and rode away. No fires, no blood. Just the sound of hoofbeats. Fading into the pines, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just stood there, stunned. Unarmed in every way that mattered. Elijah slowly exhaled, the rifle lowering in his hands. Clara clutched the feather like it was carved from gold. She looked up at her father. Do you believe me now? He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was no longer fear. It was respect. The Lakota riders vanished into the tree line, like ghosts returning to the underworld. Snow drifted behind them, covering their tracks as if the land itself wanted to protect their passage. For a long time no one spoke. Then, slowly, the townsfolk began to drift away, rifles lowered, lips tight, heads turned low. Even the preacher, once so quick to cast judgment, shuffled off with a furrowed brow and a quiet cross drawn over his chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't defeat. It was something else. It was humbling. Elijah sat on the porch that night with a cup of strong coffee in his hands, not speaking, just staring into the dark. Clara sat beside him, her small boots swinging from the edge of the step, the Lakota feather clutched tight between her fingers. You were right, he said finally, voice raw like gravel. He wasn't full of hate. Clara nodded but didn't say anything. Sometimes silence spoke louder. Elijah let out a slow breath and looked toward the barn. You know, he said, I've buried friends in that barn. Shot a man there once too, years ago. Thought it'd never be good for anything but work and blood. He took a sip, squinted at the stars, but today it became something else. In the weeks that followed, news spread like wildfire across the plains. A Lakota war party came to a settler's barn and left in peace. The story twisted as stories do. Some said Clara had healing powers. Others said the warrior had been an exiled chief. But the real truth stayed with the Whitlocks. That barn, once just wood and nails, became something more. Lakota riders began leaving gifts at the edge of the fence, pelts, beads, feathers. Strangers passed through not with rifles, but with stories and respect. Once, a wounded trapper was brought to the barn, placed gently under the same rafters where the warrior had healed. He survived. After that, folks started calling it the healing barn. Asterisk, no one painted a sign, no one made a law. It just was, Clara. Grew. The world around her changed, railroads came, towns expanded, old hatreds faded like worn-out flags. But the feather remained above the hearth, beside the quilt, carefully mended with sinew and soft wool. Asterisk, when asked, she'd tell the story, how a wounded man became a guest, how fear gave way to mercy, how 200 warriors rode not for war, but for honor, and always the same question would come, weren't you afraid? And she'd always answer, a little. But he looked colder than I was scared. Elijah never spoke much of that day again. But the rifle above his mantle gathered dust. And his barn was never again locked. Not once in 30 years. Asterisk, he died with peace on his face and his boots off. Something few frontier men ever got to claim. Asterisk, when Clara buried him, she placed the Lakota feather in his hands. Now, if you ride west of Bridger's Ridge, past the cottonwoods and the sun-dried gulch, you'll find a weathered old barn standing alone in the tall grass. The roof sags. The wood's gone silver-gray. But folks say when the wind cuts just right, you can still hear hoofbeats slow, solemn, distant as thunder, not a threat, a promise, asterisk, a reminder of a little girl's kindness and the warriors who rode not for vengeance, but to say thank you.